This is almost an unusual year for Republicans. Typically, what happens on the Republican side is that you already know going into the election cycle who is going to be the likely nominee, because that's the candidate who was the runner-up in the prior session. If you go back to Gerald Ford in 1976, the runner-up was Ronald Reagan, and then in 1980 the runner-up was George H.W. Bush, and so on, with very rare exceptions. I've heard it described as it's like running for being the president of the Rotary Club, where you first start out as the chair of the speakers, and then you're the first vice president, and 3 or 4 years later you end up as the president. You just have to work your way up the ladder. This year it's unusual. It's fairly wide open. If you followed the traditional betting, Sarah Palin, as having been the vice presidential nominee, should be the obvious candidate for the Democrats. But Sarah Palin is Sarah Palin. Who knows what her agenda is? It's other than to try to keep elbowing herself to the front of the parade so she gets plenty of media. But we'll see where she goes. Mitt Romney comes in as probably the senior figure, the grown-up in the room, so to speak, so far. He has done certainly very well in early polling. He is clearly the front runner in New Hampshire. A lot of that is the glow from Massachusetts, so he'll start in a fairly strong position. But Mitt Romney also brings with him perhaps more baggage than most early front runners do, and so the question about whether first and foremost he can explain how the Romney Care bill in Massachusetts that provided for medical care for people in Massachusetts, that is, at least in its major points, almost identical to what is dismissively called Obamacare, how he's going to be able to work through that with the conservative Republican electorate is a major issue for him. You look down the rest of the list, and there are some familiar names that are there. Of course, to have Newt Gingrich reappear after wandering in the desert, so to speak, for maybe a dozen years is interesting. He will bring certainly some interesting moments to the debate. But some of the others, the new faces could catch on. Tim Pawlenty, the former governor of Wisconsin, has been working very hard and could fill an interesting role out there. John Huntsman, former governor of Utah, but served a term, or served at least 2 years as U.S. ambassador to China under President Obama. He's interesting in many ways and could be the fresh face if the Republican Party decides to go in that direction. A bit of an unknown, though, for I think a lot of the party to go to. An interesting candidate who is emerging in New Hampshire is Herman Cain, the former president of the Godfather's Pizza chain, but who had a rather, I think, successful career as a CEO and chief executive, and now probably known better for talk radio. That seems to be a place where a lot of candidates are coming from lately, and so he has been working very hard up in New Hampshire. So it's I think the field is broad. It's I think a little bit early to know if we're going to end up with any more entries. I suspect that at least the big names that we already know are in there, with the possible exception of Sarah Palin. I'd be surprised if she put off her little game much longer than she has now. We'll see where she goes. There is, I think, some interesting tickets you could pull together with those who said that they're not willing to run. Mike Huckabee, I think, leaps to mind. If Mitt Romney, for instance, gets the Republican nomination at the top, he is going to have to balance that ticket, at least within his Republican base, and particularly the evangelical Christian side of that base, with somebody like Michael Huckabee, who clearly could be somebody who will fill that. So that would leave it open. Now, whether Huckabee, after saying no to the top job, would be willing to slide into number 2 is an open question. But it's not at all unusual for those kinds of accommodations to be made, in part because it doesn't entail the long run-up to the elections that running for the top job does. So when somebody says they're not going to run for president, I never assume that they wouldn't accept a number 2 on the slot. Mitch Daniels is another, I think, very interesting candidate, and in many ways was the hope for people who would occupy the center of the Republican spectrum. Very successful as governor of Indiana, thoughtful. However, his decision not to seek the presidency, as he said, was purely based on his family not willing to make the kind of personal sacrifice that entails. Whether they would be able to change that view and go forward as vice president, I think, is an open question, and quite possibly he would make someone, I think, who would add substantially to a ticket by bringing it some gravitas, some serious heft. So I wouldn't at all put that out. On Donald Trump, I think we've probably seen the last of Donald Trump now that his reality show has been renewed for another season. I suspect that he is going to be happy to stick on TV, or perhaps he and Sarah Palin will get together and do a pizza series. We'll see. It's certainly historical and almost a truism in presidential campaigns that American voters are going to vote their pocketbooks. It's really all about the economy. Right now, the gains that the economy has made since 2008 seem to be incremental at best, and there continues to be talk about whether we might slip into a double-dip recession in here. I think that is clearly the major weapon in the Republican arsenal to try to defeat President Obama, and it's the concern that the Democrats must face, starting with him at the top of the ticket, but really all the way down. The polls clearly show when the voters are asked about how President Obama is performing in handling the economy, he gets very negative marks, and unless something turns around really in the next 6 months that Americans actually feel like they're doing better, I think he could remain extremely vulnerable, and by that time the Republican field will probably have sorted itself out enough that there is a fairly clear, if not already a designated front runner. So I think we'll know by perhaps January or February pretty much what the field is going to be, and we'll see how vulnerable President Obama is. But right now, that issue, the jobs issue, growth of the economy, the size of the federal deficit, all those issues right now are extremely problematic for him. At this point in the campaign, is about the only thing that the polls will tell us is how the American mood is on the key issues. The polling, when you try to look at a matchup of a theoretical matchup between someone on the Republican side and President Obama, they're not only measuring the wrong thing, but the results are so subject to what's the problem of the week right now that I wouldn't put too much to them. Keep in mind with polling, whenever you see a theoretical matchup in those races, that what you're talking about would only work if we voted nationally with a single national ballot, if everyone in every state voted regardless of where you were. But that's not the way we play this. The way American politics is done, it's in the Electoral College, it's a race in 50 states, and so all we will know going into the election really is how Americans perhaps feel in this national, essentially a national mood, and you really don't know until you look at it on a 50-state basis who's most apt to come out of the White House. So at this point, those matchups are essentially worthless.